Good afternoon. This is rbright with Greenshades Software, here to present the mid-year payroll and HR checkup. Just trying to keep pace with changes that are happening in the remainder of 2022, kind of recap some of the challenges that us and many other businesses have seen in the beginning of this year, as well as through COVID. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out after the webinar or after you watch the recording. We have this content available as well as the sources for some of these statistics that I'm going to go over. So happy to assist any way possible related to helping tackle some of these challenges that we see coming, or if you have any specific compliance questions. Right. So I myself, I'm the Vice President of Sales here at Greenshades Software. I've been here since 2010, helping thousands of clients, wearing a couple of different hats across customer service, marketing, sales, and really helped a ton of different businesses across a lot of different industries, whether that is transportation, staffing, healthcare, nonprofit, etc. Greenshades can help any client that's cutting checks in the United States or paying employees in the United States. So we're happy to assist, and I've been here quite a long time. So really kind of have varied experience across a lot of these compliance changes, whether it was ACA or the CARES Act that happened recently. In today's agenda, going to touch on a couple of those specific pieces. So really just kind of looking at the world of work and giving you a quick review and some specific key events that we've seen happen in the first half of the year, as well as looking at the remainder of the year and kind of what we see might be coming down the pipeline for whether that's tax changes or things that will just be payroll and HR challenges, and how those equal kind of operational challenges and changes for specific organizations. Ourselves here at Greenshades, we've had to move to remote work primarily across our workforce. We've had to allow a lot more access to payroll and HR information online, obviously being a portal provider ourselves and trying to focus on allowing as much access to that information as possible for our clients, but also ourselves. It has introduced a number of different challenges and changes as employees move to new states and they move to new localities maybe that we weren't collecting tax in previously. A lot of those things are things that we now have to pay a lot more attention to and ensure we're staying on top of. Just as before, a lot of us were housed here in Jacksonville, Florida. We definitely had a good portion of our workforce remote, or at least partially remote. Now pretty much everybody is working primarily remote. So a lot of different changes to our personal business that I'm sure a lot of people can commiserate or compare to. We wanted to talk about how you can best safeguard some of those best practices around handling information online, as well as keeping that information secure and ensuring that your employees are engaged and empowered to make those changes. Obviously, this is a recorded webinar right now, so if you have questions, we're going to do a Q&A kind of after the fact. I'm happy to help out anybody with anything specific that we can assist with, though. So as we get moving here, some events impacting the world of work. We know that there's been a ton of resignations across the last year, a lot of people changing jobs, a lot of people changing their focus, a lot of new businesses opening up, some closing down through COVID, right? So as those changes happen, what challenges have we seen on the business side related to, and kind of what do we want to keep track of as we kind of move forward? In the live webinar, we had a poll question specifically asking if you had a payroll and HR portal, if you allowed access to your employee information online. A very important question, obviously, to ask yourself as you work to safeguard your business and as you work to allow efficiencies and streamline as many processes as possible in those back office processes, right? So as I kind of mentioned, right, we've seen a lot of local challenges and things that are happening internationally. Obviously, there's a lot of things happening in Europe that are affecting supply chains with, the war in Ukraine and Russia and some of the surrounding countries that is affecting. That's affecting the supply chain, but also in the United States, we're still, getting emergency imports because of what's happening related to that supply chain, right? So there's more planned here in the future, but that's definitely affecting our access to a lot of different goods. I mean, obviously, I think a lot of people see the information about, formula here in the news and other, types of supply chain issues that's causing. And I'm sure there are some businesses that we work with that's affecting kind of how they source material and how they can actually deliver pieces for their customers as well, right? And that is doubling down on kind of the labor that goes into that. We saw almost 12 million jobs in March that were unfulfilled, right? So a ton of job openings right now, 4.5 million people leaving their jobs across that same time period. It is, a increasingly difficult and challenging conversation around employee retention that we're seeing, right? So we see compensation being a primary focus, but even those double-digit increases around compensation aren't always keeping those same employees, right? Modest raises aren't enough anymore. We have to dip into those double digits we're seeing, and sometimes that's not even enough. We need to care much more about how we reward and retain these employees and how we're engaging them to gather the information that is driving them to stay in their jobs, right? So if you have an employee portal, if you're surveying your employees, if you're doing employee engagement, it's very, very important right now. Inflation is skyrocketing right now. I think we saw back in April that's 8.3%, but a 40-year high in inflation, and obviously a constant conversation coming out of COVID. We're in 22 right now. I think we all expected the world to evolve and maybe go back to what it was. And I think, we're all kind of aware or maybe waking up to the fact that it might not. We might just continually evolve and see things change, some for the better, and some it's going to be a little more difficult, a little more challenging. It's going to be a different kind of stage that we're stepping into here. Real estate prices, with that skyrocketing right now, sale prices going up in the last 12 months, we're seeing that kind of even out a little bit across this year, but it's hard to tell with interest rates related to that I think I'm touching on here in a second, but it's difficult. So all of these things are playing into, what kind of raises employees expect and what they need to, live the life that they would like to live, and how that plays into their work-life balance and how they're managing their information themselves, right? So a lot of things coming up, across the remainder of the year. We see some midterm elections happening that are affecting pretty major policy decisions. We saw Roe versus Wade happen, and it's caused a lot of difficulty in many different types of workforce. A lot of people are looking at relocating based on specific state policies, and people are really taking a hard look at how these social programs affect them, especially on a per state level, and thinking more broadly, especially related to that ruling, right? The Fed policies related to the interest rates I kind of touched on the real estate side, but it's affecting how employees get credit cards, how they get car loans, their mortgages, right? It's also affecting employers and that merger and acquisition side of things. I'm sure anybody who's in that business or is looking at a merger or acquisition, you might be seeing that slow down. The interest rates related to how those type of company movements are happening right now is very, very different than we've ever seen in the past. And it's causing some difficulties for people, right? We see California looking at a 4-day work week, which is, an innovative idea that we've seen in some places in Europe and a couple other different parts of the world. And there's some good data around it right now. So it's going to be interesting as some states, right, pick up some of those regional policies and maybe make some changes. And that's going to be also driven by some of those legislative changes that we're seeing. So what states are allowing these, and if you have employees in states like California being very aware of some of these changes that might come up. There's also some possible ACA adjustments coming down the pipeline. There was an IRS issued statement back in April related to some of those changes that might affect how we are offering insurance, and essentially, quote unquote, kind of fixing the glitch that was in the Affordable Care Act to ensure that the interpretation is pretty specific around eligibility for tax credits for families. So take a look at that ruling. Know that might adjust. It might adjust how you handle benefits for your employees and who all you're offering benefits to, or how employees or individuals are actually getting insurance if they're using things like that marketplace, right? So it's pretty important ruling that might come down, but also a couple of different changes that are all kind of conglomerating to make it a challenging second half of the year, right? And that's not even touching on some of the other tax changes that we see, coming up, right? There's a ton of different things coming down the pipe that I'll touch on through these organizational challenges, but all of those stressors that are happening from social change, from some, regional changes that I'm discussing, it intensifies, how employees are feeling in general, and people are feeling, right? 28% of people leaving their job is supposedly due to mental health issues right now, which I think is a hotter topic than it's ever been, right? For better or for worse, it reinforces kind of the need for that work-life balance and how employees are looking at, what they're doing with their workday and what a 9 to 5 might mean for them, and whether they're, actually working 8 hours a day or 10 or 12, and what that means for their family, right? So A lot of these are prime motivating factors and how they're making job decisions, and it's not all just around pay anymore. Pay and benefits obviously being the primary focuses on how we you know compensate employees specifically, but now there's so much more to it, especially with remote work and trying to stay engaged and trying to understand what decisions people are making in their personal life that might affect their work life is more important than it's ever been, right? So as people are working out of their homes and maybe getting some more exposure to their families than they have been if they were going in the office, it's just creating a lot of focus around a lot of these events, right? So employees that move locations, I mean, we're seeing a lot of people that have come from, California to Texas or Florida. And obviously with some of those legislation changes, that might change as well, but they're looking for a lower cost of living and they're not really looking to take a pay cut just related to where they live. That's what we're seeing. So there's some challenges with that in being, the employer of record. And maybe you had some differences of pay based on work and living location, and now we're seeing a lot of people making those decisions kind of in a bubble and maybe not always keeping their employer up to date with those decisions that they're making, from people moving into tiny houses and kind of driving across the United States all the way to living in an RV or anything in between there. It's pretty difficult to understand, how do you handle the correct payroll taxes for that? Do they have the right, understanding of, what their workday is supposed to look like as they're remote? And maybe they're not talking to everybody internally like they would have been when they were going in the office, right? And as, we saw some numbers around, quote unquote, the great resignation, we saw a lot of businesses pop up. Over 500,000 LLCs are registered during the pandemic. People are choosing a different path, whether that's gig work, things like Uber, et cetera. But even some of those things are starting to unionize, and we have to care more about, what's happening within those unions or possible unions as they move forward. But there's many people, in every business right now. I'd say most businesses in the United States, if they have, a handful of employees, also have some contractors as well right now, and making a clear delineation between what a contractor is versus an employee, and ensuring those are different roles, and ensuring you're, handling the W-2 versus 1099 conversation appropriately is always of great importance in the payroll and HR realm, but even more so now when we're working with more contractors than we ever have been, right? And some of those contractors obviously are some of those LLCs, right, that are mentioned here. So pretty important to kind of stay abreast of those changes and also just really stay in touch with your workforce, right? So as we talk about things like employee portals or posting information online or ensuring your employees are engaged, these are not new concepts, but obviously through COVID, it became more and more important to really understand what that means and what it means to your organization, right? So there are a number of new concerns that are coming down the pipe. I mentioned some of these tax changes and overtime implications on some of the earlier slides, but really understanding and preparing for these changes as you move forward, and ensuring that you have the mechanisms and a streamlined process in place to capture, whether it's new W-4 data, whether it's time, whether it's OT calculations, right? It's very, very important to ensure you're staying compliant with these things, whether you're using an ERP payroll module, you're using a standalone payroll module, you're using outsourced provider, et cetera. Understanding what that provider is doing and what their plans are for some of those compliance changes is of great importance right now. Greenshades obviously can handle some of that information. We have a full payroll and HR suite and our own payroll module where we're, cutting net to check, and those OT regulations are of a primary focus for us, especially as they change state to state in places like California. And if they look at a 4-day work week, it all has repercussions in some of that software, and especially around our payroll and HR processes, right? There's a ton of different retention programs that employers are rolling out that require additional tracking and additional reporting to ensure that, there's an ROI associated with it and that it is helping retention, right? Whether that's flex time, home office expense reimbursements, or different PTO policies or calculations, ensuring you understand how you want to accrue time off, or maybe open the door for open time off policies, et cetera. As I said, focusing on pay or focusing on just benefits might not be the only options anymore. These retention programs are really important nowadays, especially along with the engagement associated with them. If you're rolling out flex time, but your employee base doesn't know, you don't have a mechanism to communicate effectively and ensure people understand it and know how to take advantage of it, then it's not going to, work as intended. It's not going to help with retention if you're not getting that buy-in and getting that communication out effectively. A lot of these things are obviously going to affect how you close out your year end. So if you're making mid-year changes, quarter start changes, anything along those lines, or you see new regulations start to come out, if that's going to affect how you close out your year end and how you prepare for those year-end wage files, those W-2s or those 1099s, et cetera, you need to be preparing now, and you need to get some of those mechanisms in place today, right? So when you're in November, December, January, you're not in that time crunch and you're not focused on the deadline delivery date and in a panic to collect a bunch of information that perhaps you could get started today, is really what we want to make, a primary focus of, these kind of webinars, and really understanding how are you collecting changes of address? How are you collecting W-4 information? Are you taxing appropriately or changing rates appropriately as people change work and, live locations on the address, right? If they're working from different states or moving, right, their addresses, and ensuring, especially if you're in the Midwest and places like Pennsylvania or Ohio or California, like we've mentioned multiple times, it's becoming increasingly, important to ensure that, you're checking all of these boxes constantly and using a program like Greenshades to ensure that, the appropriate, tax rate is happening, or as somebody submits a new W-4, that there's some kind of automation happening to ensure that you as an employer are compliant continually. That's exactly, what we are focused on, and we want to make sure we're helping you with, whether that's through these educational webinars or through our actual software that's updating the information in payroll and making sure that as you cut checks, that it's as compliant as possible, and that, we're tracking all of those dates for you. So when you have to close out your year end, when you go through the year-end wage file process, you do have all the reporting necessary to do it in an efficient way, right? So I mentioned before the diverse worker types, contractors, consultants, versus employees, et cetera. They also care about balancing their workload and their work-life balance and ensuring you're treating them appropriately based on whether they are that contractor, that 1099, versus an employee is going to matter quite a bit, right? So what you focus on in your business and what you need is specific to you, and you probably know best, but we're ensuring that we're just reminding you of a lot of the challenges that we're seeing ourselves, both as a business and also a service provider, right? We have a number of different product features that we're rolling out specifically to help with things like security, to ensure that, we're providing the most flexible options to meet some of these challenges that are coming up. So we don't see any specific large tax updates as of today. However, obviously, I referenced the ACA change that may be coming down the pipe, and we're very aware that the IRS and the SSA sometimes wait till the very last minute in November, December, January to roll out some of these rulings that they're constantly contemplating. And then on a per state basis, it definitely will matter as we watch whether it's a 4-day work week and if that has any tax implications or any other rulings related to some of the legislation that we see going on right now. We're just very aware and know, that there's a cusp happening that might cause these changes to roll out really, really quickly, right? And around payroll, just ensuring that admins have the most flexibility, whether that's limited administrators, you want to focus maybe just on a subset or a segment of employees, or you want somebody to just be able to run payroll, but not you maybe touch every other aspect of the HR side of things. Providing this functionality to ensure that you have that capability. So as our administrators are remote as well, they're not losing any functionality, they're actually gaining it with this ability of moving to a cloud-based platform where you can actually run payroll and house all of your HR information and have a system of record that isn't requiring somebody in office or requiring multiple people to touch specific types of information, right? We want to make this, as flexible and as easy to access as possible for these administrators, right? So this poll question in the actual live webinar was just related to how you handle your year-end process. Are you printing and mailing your W-2s? Are you allowing electronic distribution? And again, a very important question as you prep for some of these things to ensure you have this process, not nailed down all the way, but at least initiated, at least started. You want to have a vendor if you're utilizing one. You want to have internal process because we still have, the ability, but the need to provide physical forms as employees need them or as turnover employees need them if you're not providing them an electronic accessible form. And then same idea on the 1099 side. Do you have everything you need? Are you collecting the W-9s? Are you collecting address information to be able to do that distribution as you need? And do you have the right process, right? Are you handling it internally? Are you using a vendor like Greenshades? Obviously, we help with print and mail and electronic distribution of forms, whether that's 1099s, 1095Cs for ACA or W-2s or any other form in between, but ensuring that you're focused on that now so it's not a panic at the end of the year is going to be very important, right? How else can you safeguard your business? How else can you ensure that you're being prepared? I mentioned kind of throughout this the need for an HR or payroll portal, but ensuring that you have a proactive modern cloud platform is very, very important. And Greenshades obviously provides that. However, we want to make sure that you're thinking ahead, and it's not only having the platform itself, but the proactive monitoring, the compliance changes that I'm talking about related to tax adjustments, or related to W-4 changes for your employees, related to just address updates for your employees, and ensuring they have electronic access to all of this information, both the changes of it that's submitting to administrators for approval, or just the information that they need to go out there and get new loans or possibly buy a house or something along those lines. The more access they have to this information, the less they're contacting your administrators and the less frustrated, hopefully, that they become when they have to go through some of these processes, right? We try to tailor an approach, obviously designed for your actual needs. We help almost 4,000 businesses today across 15,000 FEINs in the United States, and we've been doing this for 20 years as of July this year, right? So we kind of know the challenges that employers face, and we want to make sure that we're answering for those in the most efficient way possible, and trying to answer the problems and help you save time, save money in these business processes, right? We have an unlimited support model, and just taking a look at this process yourself internally. Obviously, Greenshades provides some of these things. However, what does the process look like for you? Do you have the support you need? Do you have the process underway to make these compliance updates and changes? Are you aware of what might be happening in the second half of the year or moving into 2023 is really what we're highlighting here. We're providing some answers to that if you have questions or concerns internally. However, asking the question of yourself as an employer is of what's most important right now, right? So we touch on a number of different automated updates related to, tax policies changes. But as the market changes, there's a new ruling, in July, and it has to start in August. Are you prepared, and do you have a process to make those updates? Greenshades specifically automates all of those processes in the back end. We have continual updates and releases happening on our side to ensure that we help our clients stay as compliant as possible, right? And we try to stay as transparent with those changes. That's part of the reason we do some of these webinars, just to ensure that we're helping clients, prospects, but really everybody, business out there. We provide these webinars at no cost. We also have CPE webinars where we're providing this information as much as possible, just so people can get as much value from it as they can, right? When you think of things like payroll taxes and how you handle both these changes, there's also things like liability payments. What does your cash flow look like today? Are you aware and ready to make changes if there has to be adjustments to that cash flow based on any of these tax adjustments? Greenshades doesn't require any float related to these, and our payroll tax service obviously has unlimited and dedicated support. They actually had a one-on-one relationship with a representative, but with that, you also don't have to worry about additional cash coming out of your pocket if you're using something like an outsourced provider or anything else along those lines. It is just going directly to the government facility that you're trying to pay. So it's important as these changes happen, whether it's PTO accruals, payroll tax payments, e-files, adjustments, etc., W-4 changes, all of these pieces that come along with all these challenges that we're seeing, people updating their HR records, people looking for historical pay stubs if they're a termed employee, they're one of those people that resigned, right? The more bandwidth and manpower that you have to provide those termed employees or these processes internally, the more it's costing you, right? Where if you're using a service, if you're using a software to provide some of this information, you have access to it. Your termed employees, your current employees have access to all of this. The touch of it at a login, right? Then it makes it so much more streamlined for your business, right? Greenshades, as I mentioned, right? We work for mid-market companies, everybody from 50 employees to 5,000 plus. We have a number of different enterprise-sized clients. We really focus on employee engagement and empowerment. We want employees to have access to everything at their fingertips, and we want to give it to administrators for approval and access to update their records and ensure that they get best of class support, right? So That's exactly what we provide in some of this information, right? And we want to make sure you're constantly asking, how healthy is your organization? Really just in thinking about all the things that I'm going over right now, what does that mean for you as a business? Does this checklist, have a ton of check marks by it? Do you feel confident going into the end of the year or not? Right. And with this last poll question, what we're really asking is, how often are you looking at some of these software changes, whether it's payroll and HR or specifically a modern cloud payroll system, whether you're on GP or any other payroll system, related to your ERP or not? How often are you really taking a look at what you're being provided and what your process looks in that back office, right? We want you to do a self-assessment. We want you to keep ahead of these changes and try to keep as compliant and as safeguard your business as much as possible. By knowing your teams, understanding whether they're making those moves to different states, understanding how you're handling those tax implications. How are you supporting your entire workforce? Maybe not just the in-office employees, but those warehouse employees as well, right? Automate and optimize as many of these steps as possible, right? You don't want to have to care about compliance changes. You don't want to have to care about, tax rate updates, being aware of them, but also having to update, your system and ensure it's, calculating the records correctly, et cetera, can become a very large task, right? So trying to use, software providers or service providers that are helping you with these things can obviously streamline that quite a bit, right? So prepare for a lot of these changes. Stay aware of everything that's coming up, and keep your employees in the loop. Communicate as openly and transparently as possible to make sure they're aware that you guys know these are challenges, both for you as a business, but them as employees and in their personal lives as well. So it's really, really important, to try to communicate as much as possible, especially through all of the different life changes that we see coming up. I mean, we mentioned everything that's happening in Europe, all the way down to supply changes, to mortgage rates. I think we all know as individuals, this is affecting us, right? But it's affecting us as a business as well, right? So we don't want to lose sight of the actual people behind a lot of these changes and how it's affecting them on a day-to-day business, and not just focus on the bottom line, right? But a lot of these things then affect the bottom line. But if everybody is, communicating openly and trying to be as transparent as possible, it definitely helps move those things along. So if you have any questions, or if Greenshades can help you in any way, or I personally can, please reach out, rbright@greenshades.com or sales@greenshades.com. We'd be happy to assist. We have a blog on our website right now where we're constantly posting anything that we can that might be helpful to employers, as well as any updates related to Greenshades. We're running these webinars on a pretty often basis as well to ensure we're sharing our knowledge base. We have multiple CPPs, certified payroll professionals internally, as well as subject matter experts across multiple industries here at Greenshades. So we're constantly trying to share that help and that knowledge, whether you're a client or not, or whether your clients are our clients or not. Even if you're a service provider or a reseller, et cetera, sharing this information is free, and ensuring people stay up to date is at no cost when it's provided from Greenshades in these webinars. So thank you so much for your time today. Definitely appreciate it. If I can help with anything, again, don't be hesitant to reach out, rbright@greenshades.com, or you can reach out to sales@greenshades.com with any questions. Thank you and have a great day.